Today we have Glenn Shemy Schembechler joining us in Rotary. Shemy serves as the president of GES Advisory Company and has spent the majority of his life and professional career in the funeral industry, growing up as the son of legendary football coach Bo Schembechler. Overall, he has spent 18 years evaluating talent for the Kansas City Chiefs, the Chicago Bears, the Washington Redskins, and the Seattle Seahawks. The education gleaned from these experiences has given Shemy an understanding of how teams are built with an objective viewpoint of talent evaluation, an acumen that is necessary for any program interested in competing for championships, like those NFL teams do. Shemy and I went to Miami of Ohio together, years don't matter, where his dad spent time coaching also. I've heard Shemy speak before. He's pretty energetic, and he's open to talking about anything. So we're going to allow a lot of time at the end for questions. You can ask him questions about coaching young kids for NFL talent. You can ask him questions about growing up as the son of a former legendary football coach. And I just wanted to let you see his shirt. This is his nicest way of not wearing all blue and gold. It's mixed in with a lot of other colors. But Shemy, I'm sure you've noticed the Rotary colors are blue and gold. We've done that for you. I wore my scarlet and gray tie just to offset that. Help me welcome Shemy Schembechler to Columbus Rotary.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it. And that is one of the recruiting tools that actually brings me here is the maize and blue napkins on all the tables. So I think that's awfully cool. I wanted to make mention to Mike in regards to the Schettinger funeral services. We actually lost our little Westie bunny back in May. And lo and behold, I didn't even know that Schettinger does a service where they actually cremate your dog for you. And the idea that I don't have an opinion in this matter, but the fact that my wife Megan was extremely pleased with the service speaks very well to your organization from her standpoint, which is a great thing. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about just the relationship that my dad had with Woody and how the whole thing really started at the beginning is that my father was a junior quick tackle at the Miami University team back in 1949 when Woody came on campus. And so my dad obviously got the coaching bug, getting coached by Woody Hayes. And as a result of that, there was a great game in 1950 that pitted Woody Hayes' Miami University against Sid Gilman's University of Cincinnati. And back in those days, whoever was going to win that game was going to get the Ohio State job, which recently had just opened up back then. And lo and behold, Woody won the game. And as a result of that, he had a nice conversation with my dad after he got his undergrad degree. He says, "Bo, I want you to come with me. I'm going to put you through graduate school, and you can serve on my staff." And so starting in 1951, that's really what paved the way for my father to really get into coaching. And so come to figure out how easy it is, from my father's standpoint, how appreciative and how excited he was to join Woody's staff back in those days. And I can tell you unequivocally that there's no single coach in the history of college football that had a bigger impact on my dad than Woody. So the idea that they go through this whole period of time, he was a GA, got his master's degree, served in the Army for a period of time, and then came back. He served on the coaching staffs for both Ara Parsegian up at Northwestern, Dwight Perry at Bowling Green, and then ended up coming back on Woody's staff back in 1958 as his offensive line coach. And for years, Woody would tell my dad, you know, when it's all said and done and I'm ready to retire, I'm going to have you take over as the next head coach at Michigan. And so my dad's waiting and waiting and waiting. And then the Miami job comes open in 1963. So he takes the job. He's still waiting, wins 2 or 3 Mid-American Conference championships. And come 1968, at the end of the season, the University of Michigan job opened up. And my father just absolutely couldn't say no to the University of Michigan, having recruited half of the players on that team. And knowing the talent level that was up there and what a great opportunity it was, he jumped at the opportunity. He just couldn't wait for Woody any longer. So that's where it really pitted the rivalry the way it was. And the fact that the two were so familiar with each other, that knew the strategies in terms of offense, defense, special teams, recruiting, the whole 9 yards, that they really knew each other. In many ways, they were absolutely kindred spirits in coaching. And so when my dad got the Michigan job, everything that he did in the leadership of that program was to gear itself to beat Woody and the Ohio State Buckeyes. Because in 1968, as many of you very well remember, Woody's greatest team won the national championship in 68, and everybody said in 69 that that team was even better. So my dad comes into Michigan. He starts with a roster of 148 players coming through winter conditioning. By the end of spring practice, the roster had been whittled down to 48. That's how many players quit the team, because they couldn't take his conditioning program, the padded practices. He sent them through 30 straight days of padded practice and kicked the living daylights out of them. And so that's really how the standard was set. And so obviously that paved the way for the great 10-year war, which to me is regarded as the greatest coaching rivalry of all time, those 10 years when Bo versus Woody. So a couple years after that, and Woody had been gone from Ohio State, they got together and filmed what is known as the 10-Year War video series. And I don't know if any of you had seen that, but it was amazing that when they videotaped that Bo and Woody did no rehearsal whatsoever, that they could actually tell you each and every game, the details as to why they won or lost. And I just absolutely enjoy that video to no end. And I just can't simply see it enough, just seeing the personality and how they described what their strategy was in each and every game. And so after that was over, excuse me, my father had invited Woody up to come to our house because he hadn't been to Ann Arbor in many, many years in a non-coaching role. And so he ends up coming to our house. It was a beautiful spring afternoon. It was right after spring football was over, and in those days, recruiting wasn't nearly as busy as it is today. And so Woody pulls up with his driver, pulls up right in front of 870 Arlington, and he comes across our front yard, and my dad comes out there so excited to see him and meet him in such a social environment, because they never had much opportunity like that. So he meets him halfway through the field, and Woody walks right up to him, looks him right into the eye, shakes his hand. "I didn't come here to see you." Walks right by my dad, goes to my mom, Millie, and says, "Mrs. Schembechler, thank you so much for having me to your house today." Here's little Shemy, 11 years old. This is the first time anybody has ever spoken to my dad like that, ever. And so since that day, I've been in love with Woody Hayes. So it just makes sense that obviously football runs through my blood. I was born in 1969, my dad's first season at Michigan. And for years, my dad told me not to coach. He goes, "I want you to be a much better family man than I was." And so we went through the process. My mother had passed away in the summer of '92. I came back home to serve on Gary Muller's staff as a graduate assistant. And those are amongst the greatest times of my life, because my office was literally right across the hall from my dad. And so for those 2 years, we were as close as we ever were. And so we shared a lot in terms of coaching philosophy, life, how to handle your career, what to do going forward. And so my dad still had the stance, you're not going into coaching. By my second year, the NCAA had come down with new rules saying that the recruiting coordinator had to be a coach. Well, obviously, I go right back into my office. He goes, "No way in hell are you doing that." And so I had to come up with an alternative career because I so much loved the game of football and I wanted to be a part of it. And that's really what laid the groundwork for me to get into the NFL, with all these NFL scouts and personnel directors coming through. And that's really how I broke into the NFL with the Kansas City Chiefs as an in-house scout. So that's really how everything got started from my standpoint. And so after 16 years, and you end up getting a little bit older, you get married, you have a kid, life changes, your priorities change. And so now that my son is 6 years old, getting ready to go into the first grade right here in the Upper Arlington School District, it was easy for me to say no to 9 months on the road out of the year, which is what your life is all about in the NFL. And so, so the Redskins actually did me a favor. They fired me after 15 years. I did a little bit of consulting work with the Seahawks. And so that was really a really big transformational time for me. And so I ended up doing some financial advising for a short period of time, ended up not liking it, got into the franchise world and did some of that for a period of time. And so now I'm in a position to join whatever I've learned in the business world and combining that with my scouting career, being able to evaluate college and high school players and really advising not only Division I programs, but also high school kids about how to handle the recruiting process. So that's what I'm getting involved with now. And then because I'm a glutton for punishment too, I've decided to go get my master's degree at Ohio U. So I just started our first residency last weekend. How I'm going to put that together on a schedule, I'm not entirely sure. But somehow, hell or high water, I'll figure it out. So I wanted to get a little bit into, obviously, you probably want to hear even an early preview of what the Michigan-Ohio State game is going to be like this year. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So having followed these two programs for a very long period of time, I can tell you unequivocally the arrival of Jim Harbaugh up at Michigan is absolutely needed, not only for Michigan's program, but also for this rivalry, because I think it injects enthusiasm, excitement that we haven't had in quite some time. And people are going to make the comparison between Urban Meyer and Woody Hayes and Jim Harbaugh and my dad. And I think that's unfair to those guys in many ways, because we're in a different era. College football is much different than what it was back then. But I like the idea that that enthusiasm is there. And I think when it comes down to the game this year, Ohio State obviously is the defending national championship, and having taken a look at their roster going through spring football and studied them at some level, I can tell you Ohio State's more talented than they were last year, and they're easily more experienced. So I think they're going to be a very tough out, particularly as we go through the Big Ten Conference. And the idea that they've got three seasoned quarterbacks, one of which is going to switch positions, it looks like. Just the talent, the athletic ability, and the speed is really going to be hard for any defense to match up in this conference. And so you take a look at that, you take a look at a veteran defense at Ohio State that has really come of age, particularly late last year. I can absolutely see them being one of the perennial defenses in the Big Ten Conference. So when you look at Ohio State, which seemingly has little to no weakness on each side of the ball, and comparing them to a Michigan team that still has some work to do, particularly on their talent level. But this isn't to say that Michigan won't compete, because particularly on defense, their personnel is good. They've got a really good coaching staff up there now, and I think from a scheme standpoint, they're really going to have an understanding of how to stay in games. And so if the Michigan defense can keep up the slack, particularly early in the season, to see how the offense progresses, I can see Michigan not necessarily competing for the conference championship, but making games very interesting late in the year. So we will have to see what happens there. But I think Michigan's big challenge this year is going to be, how do they develop a quarterback when they have a first-year transfer from the University of Iowa, and then a bunch of other quarterbacks that are either young, inexperienced, or just haven't really developed to the level that they need to? I can tell you that Michigan absolutely needs that quarterback to step up and develop, and they need a guy that they can rely on. Because quite frankly, you look at the offensive line, you look at the running backs that they have put together here in the short term, they have yet to really identify a bell cow in terms of a running back or even a fullback. And there's going to be a lot of pressure put on that offensive line, because they absolutely have to establish the running game early on if they're going to have any kind of chance to develop a quarterback. So I can absolutely see Michigan, Ohio State going up to Ann Arbor, and I can see them having a resounding victory just the way things are right now. But obviously it's a long football season. You have to be patient and just see how everything turns out. But I can tell you this, the fact that Harbaugh is up there and the type of background and success that he has had in the past, he brings an absolutely needed necessity of overall toughness and physicality, and that should never be discounted when it comes to the Michigan team. But nonetheless, I still think Ohio State's going to win the whole thing again. All right? I think that's my time. Did I go too fast?
No.
Perfect. All right, let's do some questions. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Have any opinions about concussion and the impact on football?
The NFL has put together a commission, a concussion commission, which is comprised of many doctors and neurologists that are a part of the process. And I think they're looking at any and all options, whether it's the helmets, whether it's the style of play in the NFL. I absolutely think that the nature of football, there's always going to be a factor of head injuries and concussions, no matter which way you slice it. But I think there's some things that can be done in regards to how position skills are taught. I'm a firm believer, and this is especially true from my scouting career and having grown up and watching my dad coach the offensive line, how important hand use and head back is critically important. And so the NFL has instituted the Heads Up program, which I think is a brilliant idea. It's the idea that they can empower high school and grade school coaches at the local level to really teach proper hand use, footwork, head position, so that it's not so much leading with your head, it's leading with your hands. And so much of what was taught early on in football, I think we've gotten away from that a little bit, is the idea that you have to use your hands. If you want to sustain blocks and have an effective running game, because that's where a lot of these concussions occur, is that technique, footwork, and hand use become critically important. If we teach it the right way, I think in a lot of ways we're going to alleviate a lot of these concussion issues, particularly at the high school level, which I really think is the most important. But obviously everybody's going to look at the NFL as setting the standard for how these things are taught and educated and addressed from the NFL level, because everybody's going to follow suit with what the NFL does. So we will see how this comes about, and obviously we have a very pertinent understanding of the NFL lawsuit that's come about. And obviously that's a very technical legal issue that I can't quite get my arms around. But I think once we get past that and people are settled back into their positions, we can really get back to really addressing the issue on the field, which is really where it's important. Yes, sir.
What about the compensation issue for college players?
It's coming.
How do you think about that?
Well, there's going to be some interesting ideas that are going to come out of that. I think one of the issues that really has to be addressed in that matter is about these no revenue Division I programs like the Mid-American Conference and the Mountain West. Those programs are going to struggle competing with the Power 5 conference schools to address that issue. I think, in all honesty, is athletes, particularly at the collegiate level, and the whole argument revolves around how these players maintain control of their own name and likeness and being able to develop their own brand. I think there's going to be some concepts coming down the pike that are going to put student athletes in a position where they're going to be able to have control of their own name and likeness. So the fact that this university is going to be selling jerseys with their numbers on them, not necessarily with their names, but everybody knows that's that player. I can tell you, Denard Robinson, we had more number 16 jerseys than anywhere just a few years ago, is that there has to be a way to compensate those players after they get their degree. And to me, if you can motivate them and really inspire them from an academic standpoint, say, hey, if you get your degree in 4 or 5 years, is that there will be a check for you at the end. So it'll help you set up a business, set up your foundation once you become a professional athlete, or even a business owner after you leave. Those are the types of things that I think are going to address the issue. To what level, I'm not entirely sure, but I can see those things coming down the pike. Yes, sir.
Yes, on a personal note, how long have you been in Columbus, and what got you to Columbus?
Okay.
Also having such a legendary name, I'm sure you have some fun with on a daily basis.
Yes. Yes.
So we're thrilled to have you here and talk about that.
Yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about how that works.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. So when you're an NFL scout, you have almost no time for a social life. So you end up trying to date on the run, meeting people in different parts of the country. And believe you me, I was just like my father taught me, I was extremely particular about who I would entertain as a prospect. So lo and behold, I'm down here in Columbus, Ohio on Labor Day weekend of 2000. And I was down here with a friend of mine that we actually went to Miami together, Scott Jaden, who's still a very dear friend of mine to this day. And we decided we're going to go over to his house, have a couple steaks, and we're going to go down to German Village and see if we can scout out any talent down there. We end up at Victory's, and we get there really early, and probably too early as it turns out, and we're just sitting there at the bar having a couple glasses of water and drawing up plays on cocktail napkins and things like that. And lo and behold, about 3 hours after, the band starts playing, and then these group of about 6 girls come in. And I immediately spot one right in the back. I go, TJ, look at that one. She is hot. So lo and behold, we end up meeting. I was too shy to say anything initially. TJ went over and started talking to her. And lo and behold, she is the daughter of, to me, one of the most upstanding men here in the Columbus area, Dr. Gary Racy, who taught oral surgery here at Ohio State for 30 years. So his claim to fame, he actually did the molars for both Rex Kern and Art Schleister. That's his claim to fame, which is good enough for me. And so we met, we talked for maybe 5-10 minutes. I got her name and her phone number, and I was excited, and so we did the dating thing for about the phone thing for about a month. Brought her up to Chicago. I was scouting for the Bears at the time, and actually invited her father to come with her, which I think was a good omen for me to say, hey, bring your dad up. This is how much I like you. And so, to make a long story short, we end up falling in love, and within several months, I proposed to her, and so then the decision came, where are you going to live? And so I was approached by a couple NFL teams to join their organization as a full-time area scout, and so one of which was Kansas City. I could have gone back to Kansas City. I could have gone back to Washington, which I ended up being with for 11 years. And so they said, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to move to Ann Arbor? You want to move to Columbus? Meg says, my parents are ready to be grandparents. And they're here full time. They're not traveling like your dad is all over the place. This is going to be a much more stable environment for you. You have to believe me. And so lo and behold, that was 2001. I've been here ever since, and haven't regretted one day about it. And the one thing, and I want to address your question about being a Schembechler living here in Columbus, and so inevitably, you're going to run to somebody that's going to give you a little bit of a rough time. And so if my wife is not with me, when my wife is with me, she can lay down the law right there because she's an Ohio State fan. But if I'm on my own, I get people start giving you a little bit of grief about being a Michigan guy. And I said, do you know how much I love Woody Hayes? And obviously, the whole goal is to get them to go to therapy after they hear that. Which I would expect sometimes it's worked out that way. But that's really how I've survived. Yes, sir.
Moving to the NFL level, would you care to comment on the competence of the front office of the Cleveland Browns?
Oh, no. No. Those guys are my buddies up there. I will say this, though. They've gone through a lot of changes recently, haven't they? We will see. I think the important thing as it relates to the Cleveland Browns is to see how their first-round quarterback from last year develops this year. And so, and obviously we paid close attention to what they've been doing in the offseason. The quarterback went into therapy, and that can be a very good thing if it works out the right way. The one thing I can tell you is I did get a spare moment to evaluate him when he was a senior at Texas A&M. And I can tell you that there are absolutely some transferable skills that he showed back then that I honestly believe he can be a good NFL quarterback. One of those things is his ability to buy time and make accurate throws on the run. That's a very hard trait to really develop if you don't have it coming in the NFL. So I think if Manziel ends up being a productive quarterback, he's going to go back to having those traits. As long as he understands how coverages work and how the protections are going to fit into those coverages, and he's going to be able to find open men. The idea that he is very good at buying time, and I think a good example to compare that to is what Russell Wilson has done up in Seattle. He is absolutely one of the best in the league at buying time and allowing his receivers to get open, because the longer defensive backs have to cover receivers, the better it is for the quarterback. And so if Manziel can find that niche and develop to the level that the Browns think he can, I think the Browns will be in a much better position going forward. Yes, sir.
What happens if the courts rule that college players can't unionize?
In all honesty, I don't see it happening. But if it does, I just think it's going to change the landscape of college athletics in a major way, because all of a sudden it becomes scholarships are thrown out the window. That players are going to end up having to pay for everything that they become a part of. So they'll have to end up paying for school, they'll end up paying for the training room, the strength coach, everything that's involved in the support of that student athlete, to me, goes out the window. And I don't think that's the goal of these players up at Northwestern, is to really unionize, is really to get a level of normalcy for what their rights are as a student athlete at the college level. I do not honestly believe that they'll get to the status of being an actual union.
One of my favorite slogans of all time, and I don't know what year it was, but the year that Ohio State was winning and Woody went for 2 when we were already winning big, and the media said, "Why'd you go for 2?" And the answer is because I couldn't go for 3.
Right.
Is there any of those things on the other side? We only hear the Ohio State side, what Woody did. Are there any of those that are?
Well, I have context to that story, actually.
Okay.
It may not be from the other side, but I can give you some context to it. And not knowing the particulars of what actually happened, and that Woody was he was just being Woody. I mean, he was just, he wasn't a big fan of the media anyway. But the truth of the matter is that Ohio State, they were getting ready to just go for the point after conversion. And for whatever reason, the kicker lost his helmet in the sidelines, and they couldn't find him. And so they say, all right, the hell with it. We'll just keep our offense down there and just run the 2-point conversion. When it's at the end of the game, it's already been decided. And so it was because of the kicker couldn't find his helmet down there as to why they went for the 2-point conversion. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? Now Woody made it look like he was going for 2, and to be honest with you, I don't think Woody would have ever taken those words back anyway.
Shemy, I want to thank you. I want to thank you on behalf of Columbus Rotary, and here is a gift of our appreciation from Dick Argo at Argo and Laney Jewelers. Thank you all for attending. The meeting is adjourned.